Jewish Australians make up a tiny fraction of our population, yet they've had a big impact in shaping this nation in every field, from the arts to politics and philanthropy. Over the last 2.5 years, they've faced rising hatred and violence, including the tragedy at Bondi, the worst terror attack on our shores. And as a new war now unfolds in the Middle East, many Jewish Australians are on edge about being targeted again. But this is a community that refuses to be defined by hatred. Tonight, you'll hear from political and community leaders about how we can tackle this challenge together, but also from parents and grandparents, students and writers about their strength and resilience and how all of us can play a role in repairing our frayed social fabric. I'm David Speers, live from Sydney. Welcome to the ABC National Forum. We are live across ABC TV and simulcast on Radio National. It's great to have your company for this important discussion. We're trying something new here, a focus on understanding and listening rather than talking over each other. The aim here is to help us all better appreciate what Jewish Australians have been living through. Yes, there are other terrible forms of discrimination. This is not about suggesting one is worse than another. But after the terror at Bondi, we want to hear directly from those in the Jewish community about the scale of anti-Semitism they experience every day. In a moment, you'll meet our panel, but first, I want to introduce you to Noah and Rabbi Yossi.
Hi, my name is Noah Gomberg. I'm 17 and I describe myself as a Jew, first and foremost. That's the most important part of my identity, but I'm also just Noah. I recommend finding a Jewish friend and going to Shabbat. It's like the best part of the week. So it's basically just beautiful food and talking, debating, laughing. We're originally from Rio in Brazil. We saw Australia as the promised land because it was safe and we would be accepted. And then October 7th happened and suddenly everyone felt entitled to whatever they wanted to say about Jews.
I'm Yossi Friedman, a rabbi in Sydney. I remember as a kid growing up and walking to the synagogue on Saturdays, and on the odd occasion someone would drive past in the vehicle and throw out a slur, "You dirty Jew." But sadly, since October 7, cases of anti-Semitism have skyrocketed.
There was so much ugliness in the world, and people wanted me dead, and people were saying that out loud. People graffiti that in Jewish schools. People try to burn down synagogues. We were on the public bus and we go to a Jewish school, so our uniform is Jewish. And this 17-year-old was called a dirty Jew. And then Bondi happened.
And that night, it was just that stark. It just hit you. This is happening.
My friends lost family at the Bondi attack. How did we get here? Australia was supposed to be safe.
And I came the very next morning. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I just went straight down to Bondi Beach. I thought, I'm going to pray here. And so straight away, people were asking me about, did I know anyone and could I lead them in a prayer? And so I stood up there just for a few minutes and I shared the names that I knew.
To Marika Pogny, to Tibor Weitzen, to Matilda, who was just 10 years of age.
And so that first 30 days, I did multiple readings and services every single day.
I feel like I don't belong in Australia anymore, that I'm slowly being pushed out and out and out until I'm gone. I was always taught by my parents, by my school, that my voice is important and that it needs to be heard. So you know what? Screw it. You're gonna try to push me out. I'm not gonna be scared. I am not gonna live in fear.
Think about this idea. You think about what the Shabbat, this day of pause, means to one of us, every one of us. and how we can
The
bring
services have now moved to Archer Park, even though it would be difficult to actually move into a place where the incident happened. But the idea was is that hopefully that will assist in the healing process. And so, specifically in that space, as we're about to bring in the joy of Shabbat, the message is that we must uplift one another and always focus on the light, focus on the joy.
I have a place in Australia and I'm doing my best to contribute to society. So that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Oh, she's a remarkable young person. Thank you, Noah, and Rabbi Yossi for sharing your stories. Well, let's get into the conversation and introduce our panel. Jessica Rosen survived the Bondi attack, sheltering a young child through it all. Jeremy Stolinda is the principal of Bialik College in Melbourne, one of Australia's biggest Jewish schools. Ronnie Khan, AO, is someone many will recognise from her incredible charity work. And Michael Gawenda, journalist, writer and former editor-in-chief at The Age newspaper. Thank you all for being here tonight. Ronnie, let me start with you. Many Australians, as I mentioned, will recognise you and know the work that you have done, the incredible work that you have done in helping others. Okay. I want to ask what's driven that, how being Jewish has shaped your values and identity.
So I would say that there are three things that really I identify with in my Jewishness. And the first, not surprisingly, is food. Chicken soup, penicillin for the soul. Our challah, our platted bread that we have every Friday night. The three plats signify love, truth and peace. How beautiful. My grandmother used to make it every Friday. The second is really gratitude. The first prayer we say every morning is thank you for our physical bodies, for surviving the night, for our breath. And then it goes into that acknowledgement of the spiritual thank you and gratitude. And the third is this notion of mitzvot. This country has now heard the word good deeds and tikkun olam, repairing the world. It is incumbent on every single one of us. The world is shattered and we are the light that shines through. We bring that light. We fix the world. So I think all of those values certainly aligned and led me to do so much of the work that I do every day.
And those values, Michael, I mean, this is about more than just religious observance, isn't it? How would you describe your own Jewish identity?
Well, I was not brought up religious. I grew up in a secular Jewish environment. The organisation that I went to as a kid was a non-Zionist socialist organisation, and yet it was deeply Jewish.
Just explain that to people who may not understand how that works.
Well, you know, there are people that have said to me over the years, you're a Jew, but you don't practice Judaism, which is true, because I believe that Jews are much more than a religion. Jews are a people with a shared history and a shared sense of peoplehood. And even in the organisation that I grew up in, which was a socialist organisation, it was driven by a sort of universalism about the world. But even within that, there was a deep sense of belonging to the Jewish people. And that was expressed in my time, that was expressed through a deep commitment to Yiddish language and culture, the culture of my forefathers and foremothers. I grew up speaking Yiddish. My first language was Yiddish. When I first went to school, I couldn't speak English.
Is that right?
I had to learn English at school. I quickly made up for that, I hope.
I think you did.
And the fact is that I led a very rich Jewish life, and at the same time led a very rich Australian life. From when I was a kid, I was involved in Australian politics. Our organisation was associated with the Labor Party. We used to canvass on election days. Before elections, we used to knock on doors. My mentors were people like Barry Jones and Tom Uren, who I knew from when I was a little boy. So we were both very Australian, very involved in Australian life, and also deeply involved in Jewish life.
Jessica, let me bring you in here. As I mentioned, many will know of the incredible courage that you showed during the Bondi attack and how you protected a young girl, not your own, during that terror as it was unfolding. For many Australians, this may be all they know of you, but I wonder if you could share with us a bit more of your story and your own Jewish identity.
Well, I am a Jewish Australian and I'm proud of both identities. Both are core to who I am. I'm also an economist, but I try not to let people hold that one against me. Judaism is a quintessential part of who I am. It's not everything that I do every day. I lead a pretty secular life. I go to work, I have friends, I have family, but it shapes the way I think, it shapes the way I feel. It's a tradition, it's a culture, it's the songs I sing, it's what I teach my kids. It's just every single day, it's part of who I am and what I do.
Yeah. Jeremy, as I mentioned, you're the principal of Bialik College in Melbourne. You've got kids from preschool through to year 12. Give us a sense of, and I think a lot of people won't be aware of this, the extraordinary security that you've put in place at your school.
Well, my school, unfortunately, isn't an exception within the Jewish schooling landscape. We have guarding contracts, we have armed guards, we have fences. We're now in a situation, certainly over the last 2 years, that every excursion we go on, we have to do a security risk assessment as to whether or not it's appropriate for our children to be in school uniform, for example. And that's based on our own experience of the changing landscape that we've faced as a community over the last 2 years and what the children will face in different experiences.
And so for kids getting to and from school in their school uniform, do they have to hide that uniform?
Well, some will choose to. We encourage in the winter months the children maybe to wear a coat and to cover it up. We've had various situations of our children being targeted. Only last week, one of my students told me she was in the Melbourne CBD, she was waiting for a tram, she couldn't see on the minute counter when the tram was coming because there was a protest sticker obscuring the number. So she just went to move it away and somebody yelled at her for taking away one of these protest stickers and then saw that she was in a school uniform and then yelled at her as a child, "Effing Jew." And that's not an uncommon experience, unfortunately, and that's a very changed landscape over the last 2 years.
Well, that reality for Australian kids getting to and from school and having to make assessments, risk assessments as to whether you can even do a school excursion is certainly, not something for a lot of Australians they would be used to seeing. Ronnie, did you go to a Jewish school, or Michael, and is this...
I did go to a Jewish day school, so I was, but this was in South Africa, but many of my friends didn't, and friends here went to public schools and have told me that they'd go to school, they'd get bullied, they'd get called a dirty Jew. This is not just in the last 2 years, we're talking about in the last 30 years.
But has there been a change in the last 2 or so years?
An absolutely fundamental change. No Jew could not feel anti-Semitism after the 8th of October, where chants were called, kill the Jews, fuck the Jews, other expletives. And from that moment, our lives changed. My life fundamentally. I had never daily even thought about my Jewishness, about going to work, about ever thinking about it. And within a week or two of the 7th of October, calls to my organisation were to boycott my organisation because it was led by a Jew.
Michael, what changed for you at that time?
Well, I went to a state school, 2 state schools. I grew up in Fitzroy in Melbourne, which was an inner city suburb. There were no Jews at the school. There were lots of what we called wogs in the school, and I was a wog. I thought that I was the same as the other wogs at the school. And we often, and we all played together. We are the Australian kids, we call them Australians. We were Wogs, they were Australians. I never experienced anti-Semitism. I don't think I hid the fact that I was a Jew. I don't think I experienced. I then moved to a more Jewish area. I went to Melbourne Boys High School. Half the kids were Jewish. We used to have Jews versus Christians footy games. The Jews won quite often. I've got to say this. There'll be people watching them.
You've remembered that?
Yes, I do remember that. I didn't experience. Growing up, I didn't experience anti-Semitism.
But in the last 2.5 years?
Well, in the last two and a half years, my life has changed. I wrote a book that was published 2 days before October the 7th, in which I wrote about the fact that things were changing for Jews in Australia, especially Jews on the left. That increasingly people like me who grew up in left-wing organisations were being excluded on the basis that we were Zionists. I'd never been called a Zionist before. And I wrote that in the book. When October the 7th happened, immediately after it happened, friends of mine, we basically stopped being friends. People who I'd worked with for very many years stopped contacting me. I found that being a Jewish writer was increasingly difficult. Difficult to get gigs, difficult to get published. There were certain media organisations where I couldn't get published, some of which I had worked for. It changed my life. I had grown up in journalism, not as a Jewish journalist, as an Australian. Australian journalist. My beat was Australia. I was writing for Australians and editing for Australians. And all that changed. All that changed after October the 7th, almost immediately. It didn't take long. It took a week.
It was very fast. Jessica, let me take you to Bondi. We talked about the security at schools. There's security at so many Jewish events and celebrations. We saw why that was important, though, at Bondi. Did you ever think a moment like that would happen in Australia?
No, I didn't. I grew up in Australia. I love this country, and my parents warned me about anti-Semitism. I watched it geographically come closer and closer and closer. But, there's that famous poem, First They Came for the Others. I thought it would never come for me. That's the truth. I thought that it would never happen. But we were prepared, and we thought we were prepared, and we thought we were secure. And there was security at the event, like there was security at every Jewish event. It's difficult to describe to people who aren't Jewish what it's like. That when you sign up to a Jewish event, you actually don't know where the event is going to happen. No one will tell you until 24 hours before, because people are afraid of this thing happening. I didn't think it would happen, and then it did.
And when it happened, did you know immediately what was happening?
No, because I was born in Australia and I grew up here and I heard loud bangs, and I had never heard a gunfire before in my life. I did not know what that sound was. And it was only when people started falling that I understood what was going on.
Well, we also have Sabina Kleitman here with us tonight. Sabina's father, Alex, survived the Holocaust, fled the Soviet Union to come to Australia, but was tragically killed at Bondi. Sabina, your father, of course, came here seeking safety and a sense of belonging. What did Australia mean to him?
Australia meant everything to Dad. We escaped the former Soviet Union in early 90s to escape the persecution of Jews. And Dad loved Australia with all his heart. He used to say, I was never born there, I was born here. And in my 50s, he thrived here. It was his safe haven. He thrived here. He made Australia more beautiful, more safe for a lot of people. He contributed to the building of Olympic Stadium. He contributed to the desalination plant, to a lot of bridges and highways, in, not only in Sydney, but nationally. Australia was everything to him.
And has that image of Australia been changed for you after what happened at Bondi?
Absolutely. It's from the safe haven, and it happened so rapidly. For me, at least, for my family. They've been thriving. They made a very good life here for the past 32 years. And then on October the 8th, it changed rapidly. And it changed in a way that I would never predicted would change. It's like Soviet Union caught up with us. The Stalinist propaganda, which I've heard, I was born in Soviet Union, in the former Soviet Union. I arrived in Australia in my early 20s. So I knew what propaganda looks like. And in Soviet Union, you have a healthy skepticism to it. In Australia, I don't see that. People just fall for it. And this is something which we may need to look at as a nation. But the way Australia changed so rapidly, first I saw in my place of work, a few hundred meters from me, hateful slogans being happily chatted. Then I saw the building firebombed a few hundred meters from my home. And I watched it for half of the night burning. And I thought it couldn't get any worse. Then I saw my kids' school defaced with the anti-Semitic graffiti. And then my dad got killed.
Well, we're going to come to some of those chants and slogans shortly. Also with us tonight, Dr. Benjamin Elton, the Chief Minister of the Great Synagogue in Sydney. Thank you for joining us tonight. One of the country's most senior Jewish religious leaders. I wonder if you could tell us what you're seeing in your community a few months on from Bondi. Is it a retreat into hiding, or is it a more proud statement of Jewishness that you're seeing a few months on?
While there's still a definite sense of trauma, because everybody is 1 or 2 degrees of separation from somebody who was there, somebody who was killed. So there's still a great deal of pain that we're all going through in the sense of family, in a very intense and personal sense. Nevertheless, I've seen extraordinary resilience, and I think I've seen an increase in attendance at services and Jewish events. People are cautious, people are anxious, but they're determined not to be cowed, and Jewish life goes on. A few days ago, we had the Festival of Purim. We had a wonderful gathering of children and families, and there's a Jewish positivity which is very palpable. What about, I mean, one of the things we hope to do tonight is look at what can be done to improve the situation and the difficulties we're talking about. What would you say to all of us, I suppose? What can we do to make life safer for Jewish Australians and help them to feel more accepted? I think, first of all, there has to be an understanding that Jewish fears are real and they're well-grounded, and they shouldn't be dismissed. I think before December the 14th, there was gaslighting of the Jewish community. There was a suggestion that this was being orchestrated from overseas, this was not a local problem, and that because there'd been no deaths until that point, they would never come. And there was an overstatement or a weaponization of anti-Semitism. And I think that has now been blown away. And an important first step is there to be a consensus that that is the case. Look, just a quick question to the panel here. Do any of you ever feel you need to hide your Jewishness at all? Is that a fear?
Well, I don't, and I think it's important to say that all the evidence in polls and surveys, and even the most recent, is that there has been, that overwhelmingly Australians are not anti-Semitic or anti-Jews. The vast majority of them don't even know a Jew. We're such a tiny minority. Most of them, and those that do, feel good towards them. So, Ronnie, what about you? Do you ever feel like you need to hide who you are?
I have never, in all my 40 years here, until the last 2 years, this is my country and I absolutely adore it. But in the last 2 years, I took my grandchildren to a park. And it was right near a synagogue. There were lots of barriers, and there was a policeman. And I suddenly thought, one kid was on a swing and one was on the slide. What would I do if something happened? Because words matter. And I think we have lost this understanding that words matter.
I think that's really important. I mean, I think that You know, after October the 7th, I spoke to hundreds and thousands, even of Jews, I think, at different meetings, that wanted to talk about what was going on here, not what was going on
just
there.
Yeah. Just quickly to Jeremy.
I take a nuanced approach. I think what I would do for myself and my family is different from what I would do as a school leader for the children of other families. So, for example, as we said before about wearing uniform, I might wear myself visible signs of being Jewish, but I might make different decisions for the children in my school. But I think an important nuance here is the proudness of being Jewish and the nervousness of saying that we're Zionist. And for most Jews, not all Jews, but for most Jews, the identification with Israel as a homeland for the Jewish people is an intrinsic part of their Jewish identity. Jews have prayed to Israel for thousands of years. Jews look to the Jewish homeland as their centre of gravity, and that's for the majority of Jews. And I think what we've faced is a reaction to that core part of our identity, where that itself has become very negative in the eyes of others, and we have to explain it. And I wonder if other communities that identify with other countries have to explain and apologise for the actions of the government of those countries. I don't think they do. And I think Jews should be able to be proudly Jewish and proudly Zionist without having to say, but I'm not, I'm not responsible for the actions of that government. They can identify with Israel as a homeland without having to be vilified for that identification.
That's the perfect segue into the next part of our conversation, and we will come back to all of you a little later. Right now, though, we're going to look back at what the community has been through over the last 2.5 years since the October 7 Hamas attack and Israel's response in Gaza.
Horrifying hatred. The childcare centre was firebombed.
A major escalation in anti-Semitic behaviour.
Anti-Israel graffiti.
When the fire is eventually put out, the hateful message becomes clear.
Of anti-Semitic attacks in Australian cities.
Vandals weren't just trying to deface this Newtown synagogue, they were trying to destroy it.
A man set fire at a synagogue with 20 people inside.
A cafe in Bondi went up in flames.
Anti-Semitism is the hatred of Jews just for being Jews.
Anti-Semitism has always been part of the Australian political and social experience. For, I think, a very long time, despite the fact that anti-Semitism never left Western societies, there was a sense that knowledge of the Holocaust, knowledge of the worst excesses of anti-Semitism would keep us safe from these kinds of anti-Semitic acts in the present. And unfortunately, what we've seen is that this is not the case.
On October the 7th, 2023, Israel was attacked by the Hamas terror group.
Militants crossed into Israeli villages and executed people in their cars, at bus stops, and pulled them from their homes.
And 1,200 people were murdered, and countless more were brutalised by this terror group.
Tonight, Israel retaliates with airstrikes on Gaza.
Palestinians are neither dead nor alive now, but walking corpses instead.
The United Nations says there are tens of millions of tons of rubble in Gaza.
From October the 7th, what we see is an emergence of an anti-Semitism that is inextricably linked, I would say, to an anti-Zionism. So it still has elements of what you might call the old anti-Semitism.
This country should not belong to the Jews.
But in terms of what we might call the new anti-Semitism, this is predominantly a phenomenon of the radical left, right, which is a negation of the ideas of Jews as a people.
I actually say that Hamas deserve our unconditional support.
It's not anti-Semitic to march. It's not anti-Semitic to demonstrate. It is, however, anti-Semitic when those marches and those demonstrations cross over to target all Jewish people.
In the rallies that we've seen in Australia since October the 7th, we witness a lot of, I think, good faith humanitarian concern for the people of Gaza and for the terrible war that has ensued. But what I think people don't realise a lot of the time is that many of the slogans and many of the ideologies that are articulated in those rallies are explicitly anti-Zionist.
Not every Jewish person in Australia agrees with the actions of the government of the State of Israel. Many Jewish people are dismayed and disappointed. There's absolutely no reason why Jewish Australians should be targeted and suffer because of the actions of the government of the State of Israel thousands of kilometres away.
I want to bring in our next panel tonight. We're joined by Alex Rivchin, who's the co-chief executive of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. Josh Burns is the federal Labor MP for Macnamara, a prominent Jewish member of Parliament, and Kate Rosenberg, the executive director of the New Israel Fund in Australia. Welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. Alex, we saw there in the piece quite a few references to Zionism is terrorism. There are different definitions of Zionism. What does it mean to you?
Zionism is simply the support for the belief in the right of the Jewish people to exercise national self-determination in some part of their ancestral lands. It makes no specific territorial demands, it's not to the exclusion of other national movements, and it derives from the Jewish people becoming a people in that land more than 3,000 years ago. We had a state there with the capital in Jerusalem 3,000 years ago. We repelled occupiers and great empires and we fought them. And we eventually lost our land in the 2nd century CE to the Romans. And ever since we lost our land, we've sought to return to it and once again become a people. And so Zionism isn't merely, a national movement, it's an idea. It's the idea of Jewish self-determination, self-reliance. It's the idea that we can be a people in our own land once again. And that's why it's so intrinsic to being Jewish. And it's something that we will never discard or let go of.
Kate, in today's context, is it possible to be a Zionist but disagree with the Israeli government?
Absolutely. The essential founding principle document of the State of Israel, the Declaration of Independence, promised us that all residents, all inhabitants of Israel would be treated equally and fairly, and no matter what their race, religion or gender. And so as somebody who cares deeply about Israel and in its current form, I also care deeply about the quality of the democracy and equality for both Jewish Israelis and Palestinians.
And you have concerns about that?
I have concerns that it's sometimes difficult to hold both of those ideas at once, but I think that we, as Jewish people, or myself, is able to hold both ideas at once. I think that the discussion in Australia has become like a football match where you have to cheer one side or the other side, and I absolutely reject that. I think that we as Jewish people, as inspired by our heritage and our values, can hold the pain of both Jewish suffering, which we've seen here through various people's discussions, and also the pain of the Palestinian people.
So, Josh Burns, at the heart of this, it's not anti-Semitic to criticise the Netanyahu government, is it?
Absolutely not. And I think you've seen Israelis demonstrate on the streets in greater numbers than we've seen many Australian demonstrations, and it is a vibrant democracy and one where there is fierce disagreements. We were talking before the show about how if you sit around a table, especially at a Jewish dinner, you're going to have a lot of disagreement, and politics, trust me, the community lets me know when they disagree with me. It happens fairly often, David, but I think it's part of the proud Jewish tradition of debate and challenging each other intellectually.
Let me ask you this. Some Jewish Australians even argue that the Israeli government and its actions is contributing to the rise in anti-Semitism here. Would you agree with that view?
I think it's a very dangerous equation and a very dangerous thing to put those two things together, because as was articulated before, no matter what happens or no matter what the Israeli government does, you cannot hold responsible Jewish Australians for whatever your views are of that action. And Bondi is the most horrific example of those people who went to Bondi. They were there to express their Judaism, their Jewishness. They weren't there to express solidarity or agreement with one particular policy of the Israeli government. It was the last thing on their mind. It was a celebration of Jewish tradition and culture. And I think that's what needs to be protected. And you cannot blame the Jewish people in Australia for what your views might be of another foreign government. You wouldn't blame the Chinese community for the actions of what you think the Chinese government might do. You wouldn't blame the United States community here, the expat community, for what you might feel the United States government is doing. It's just wrong and it's dangerous. And I've seen people, even in my own political organisation, draw that comparison. And it's really dangerous.
Well, let me ask you about some of the, I guess, harder parts of this debate. Where things have become particularly heated. The accusation of genocide. The UN Human Rights Council's Commission of Inquiry did conclude that genocide has occurred in Gaza. It's being looked at still by the International Court of Justice. I'm not asking any of you to offer a judgment on that, but the debate about genocide, how does that impact on Jewish Australians and yourself?
Well, it's a classic example of what are people attributing to Jewish Australians. And for me, I see the commentary online that somehow, I support the killing of Palestinian kids and families when it just couldn't be further from the truth. And my family, my grandfather, the conflict was a big part of his life, and he left because he didn't want to raise his son in and amongst that conflict. It was one of the most heartbreaking decisions of his life. And I think you can have multiple truths at the same time, but to somehow attribute, Jewish Australians with this intent that you want to see the death and destruction of another people, it's just flat out wrong.
So what about these chants? We saw some of them in the piece there, Alex. From the river to the sea, globalise the intifada. I mean, these slogans can mean different things to different people. What do they mean to you? I
don't really accept that they can mean different things to different people. I think slogans and words have an objective meaning. And, it's like neo-Nazis saying that blood and soil can just be a good old-fashioned call for patriotism. It has a specific history and a specific meaning, and I think we need to recognise that.
So what are those meanings?
So with globalising the Intifada is particularly the second Intifada in the early 2000s, which saw hundreds of suicide bombings of Jewish civilian targets in Israel, synagogues, cafes, pizza shops, Seder halls, which resulted in the deaths of thousands of people. And that's what we're talking about. And when we talk about globalising that, it's about bringing that to Australia and around the world. And what happened at Bondi is that. It's the globalisation of the Intifada. It is targeting Jewish civilians in the most barbaric, inhumane way to advance a political purpose.
So for those who would argue when they're saying that, they're talking about resisting oppression, you're saying that has a very different meaning for you.
Look, I've heard activists say all sorts of things, that it refers to a camel rearing up its back legs and shaking off flies.
Shaking it off.
I don't think that when they chant Intifada, they're talking about camels. They're talking about the killing of Jews. And I think fundamentally they've heard what the Jewish community has said, what it means to us, and they persist in it because they intend to injure and menace the Jewish community. That's the purpose of that slogan.
And what about from the river to the sea?
Well, I do want to offer a different perspective on that, because in the time that I've spent in Israel with many of the grantees that the New Israel Fund has supported, activists would use From the River to the Sea to talk about human rights for both Palestinians and Jews and anyone who lives between the river and the sea. I would like to see, in the organisation that I represent, two states side by side with everybody enjoying civil and human rights between those two, between the river and the sea.
So when you hear From the River to the Sea, you don't find that offensive?
I think that many people do not know what they're saying when they're saying it. I'm not sure that they fully understand what it could mean to Jews, and it is deeply offensive to hear it, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, to my ears, means that no Jews will be in Israel. What I would like to see is that there is more dialogue between people in Australia, Jews, Muslims, people of no faith, to really stop and understand and ask, what does it mean to you? What do you hear when you hear that? Speak to Israelis, speak to Palestinians, ask them what their life is like living in a very complicated, difficult country at the moment.
Josh, you're literally in the middle. How do you see these particular chants?
I mean, it's a classic example, David, of the complexities in all of this and the importance of actually being able to have a conversation, something that is so difficult when it comes to the Middle East, that people's knee-jerk reaction is to label people, to say that this is what you must believe, and it's a dehumanising experience, especially from my end, when people are attributing somehow that my intent would be that I'd want to see the death and destruction of another people. And I'll give you a little story. Now, Bassem Abdo is the Palestinian Member of Parliament who was elected to Cornwall at the last election, and he called me after Bondi, and he said, is there a community function I can come and sit with you with? And he said, what do you think about it? And I said, Bass, it's a really beautiful sentiment. There's one at a synagogue in my electorate. It's going to be pretty intense. But I think that you're a Palestinian man, you're proud of your identity, you care about your community, but you're also an Australian, and to express solidarity with my people in this moment, there's got to be space to do both. And there's got to be space to hold that dialogue between those two people, and he came, and I'll never forget it.
I want to ask you, Josh Burns, you're a member of the Albanese government, you're a prominent member of the Jewish community as well. Your own electorate office was attacked, windows smashed, slogans painted on the windows, fires lit outside. Both professionally and personally, how difficult has this period been for you?
I didn't get into politics to be the Jewish guy, David. I actually care about lots of issues. I'm really lucky to be involved in housing policy at the moment, and that's something I really care about, to help Australians get into a home or buy a home. I don't think any of us pick this moment in these leadership roles where you get thrust into it.
But has it been difficult for you to balance, I guess, the fact that you are both a member of this government, but also a member of this Jewish community, and we've seen the friction between the two?
It's more than that. It's been a tearing of my own identity. I'm a Labor person. People, many of the Jewish community said, "Oh, why don't you join the Liberals?" Well, I'm not a Liberal. I'm not going to get into politics tonight, but I believe in the institution of the Australian Labor Party, but I'm also a proud Jewish Australian, and I wear a Star of David around with me all the time.
You have it on tonight?
I do. It's in there. I don't want to show my Jewish chest hair, but it's a part of who I am. But
do you ever take that off, or ever hide it, I suppose?
I never used to, but there's certainly been moments where more recently I've sort of made the choice of how much emotional energy do I have right now to deal with whatever might come my way.
What are those sort of moments usually where you're questioning whether you should hide something like that?
Just if you're in a circumstance where you don't know the people around you, and I'm more identifiable these days, and it's one of those dilemmas that being Jewish is who I am, but also being an Australian is who I am, and I think the two need to be in a place where the real litmus test for all of this, David, is not how high our school walls can be or how many guards we can put in, because I've been involved in a lot of that security funding and policy work. It's actually how little people have to care about whether or not they're wearing something that identifies who they are.
Just back on the chants that we hear, does anybody think they should be banned, Alex?
I think that certainly Intifada chants have no place in Australian society.
But banning them, making them illegal?
I think that they should be banned. And look,
what about from the river to the sea?
River to the sea is more of a grey area, I think. And again, I hear Kate's point that in Israel, some of the grantees of NIF may be supported or interpreted differently. You look at who chants it here, the organisations that lead those chants, they unequivocally oppose a two-state solution. They want to see the eradication of Israel.
But you don't say ban that phrase, the river.
I think we need to question whether we want to have that in our society, whether it's reasonable to have people chanting for the death of a country, the destruction of our country, and what happens to the people afterwards. We've seen street protests against the Russia war against the Iranian regime. Nowhere do we see death chants and calls for the destruction of the state within that.
Okay.
For some reason, only when it's Israel that's involved, that becomes okay. I don't think it is okay.
What about you two, just quickly on banning this sort of language?
I think we're a democratic country, and I would be concerned about banning terms. I do think that globalise the intifada cannot mean something else. It's a violent call, and these are supposed to be peace marches. I would like to see much more hopeful, peaceful activity and language being used.
Josh?
Less chanting, more conversations would be a good place to start. But it is very difficult to legislate against vilification as we've just gone down the road.
Well, in fact, we have with us in the audience Professor Anne Toomey, who is one of Australia's best minds on constitutional law. Thank you for being here. And we know the Queensland government has moved to ban these two phrases that we've been talking about. How will that work?
Well, with some difficulty, I think. So the first thing is that they had originally a bill which constructed it in a way to protect it from constitutional challenge, and then they ditched that at the last minute to expressly ban those two particular phrases rather than having a law of general application and then dealing it with it, later on by regulation. So that's made it much more vulnerable to challenge. The High Court has said that freedom of political communication is so fundamental to our country that it's constitutionally protected. But it's also said that it's not absolute. And so long as you have a legitimate purpose, such as protecting people from violence and protecting them from harm, then if the law is reasonably appropriate and adapted to achieve that, then the law will withstand challenge. The difficulty we've got here is that on the one hand, you've got something that's expressly banning a particular political slogan. It's not applying in generality, it's dealing with something very specifically political, and it may upend the free flow of political communication, so that means it's more likely to fail. But on the other hand, you've got some real harm that might occur. So there's going to be a difficult balance for the High Court here.
We've also got Mick Willing here with us tonight. Mick's a former Deputy Police Commissioner in New South Wales. Mick, you were responsible for counter-terrorism and Special Tactics Command in New South Wales. I'm just interested in the policing perspective on this, because the federal laws have also been changed post-Bondi, and already Hizb ut-Tahrir has been banned as a hate group, and the neo-Nazi group, the National Socialist Network, disbanded before the law passed. Does that make a difference, or do they go underground, the neo-Nazis, and still create the same problem?
Well, they can, David, and it's incumbent upon law enforcement and intelligence agencies to adapt to that. So we've seen it time and time again with the change in the threat environment, how it morphs and changes, and it's incumbent, as I said, upon police to adapt to that as well. So, over-policing and attacking and driving, those types of activities underground as well can also disperse, those groups.
And when it comes to those chants at the rallies that we've been talking about, is that difficult for police to work out where language goes over the line and they need to act?
Look, policing protests in general is very difficult. The corralling or the congregation of large amounts of people in small spaces is very difficult. The complexities around these issues make it even more difficult for police to do that on the ground. But they operate with operational legal advice at the time of those protests that have been conducted. So the police commanders have advice from a legal perspective during the course of those protests, but it's extremely difficult for those officers on the ground. It's also difficult for the organisations themselves because the resources that are required to police those types of protests are significant, and they've got to come from somewhere.
Look, just back to this panel, Alex, you were frequently critical of the federal government after October 7 for not doing enough. You accused them of a failure of leadership. Since Bondi, we've seen the laws that have been passed federally, and a royal commission was eventually agreed to. Has enough been done? What more needs to happen from here, in your view?
I think we're on a better path now. I was at the Opera House 30 days after the massacre when the Prime Minister spoke, and he gave an apology which I think was incredibly sincere. He recognised the role that Jewish Australians have played in building this country. My only complaint is that it should have been done 2 years ago after what happened at the Opera House steps. Had that speech been given at that time, I think our country would have been on an entirely different path. The Royal Commission is a good thing. We're going to have a reckoning, we're going to have a public examination of anti-Semitism, of the fraying of social cohesion, of what went wrong that permitted the terrorist attack to occur. But again, the fact that the families had to emerge from their mourning to become activists and to call for that Royal Commission, that it wasn't an automatic thing immediately after the massacre, I think is lamentable. And it's almost indicative of the arm wrestle we've had to have with the government, Josh accepted all the way through.
Thanks,
from the
Alex.
beginning.
I appreciate that, yeah.
Well, let me just get some final thoughts from both of you about what needs to happen, and not just what government needs to do, but I suppose what we all need to do here. Josh?
Well, for the last 2 years, Alex is right, it's been this sort of incident of anti-Semitism government response, and I've been involved in so much of it, where neo-Nazis march, you put in legislation to outlaw it. People are chanting, you try and put in vilification laws. It's been done around the States. People were protesting outside synagogues. All of this sort of stuff has happened, and then response.
And was the response always fast enough?
Oh, clearly not, right? And you have to be humble about all of this. But the more difficult job that we all have isn't just how high the walls are. It's actually the cultural reckoning of our country of, as was beautifully expressed before, Australia's been a safe haven for the Jewish community. And what it's given all of our families is something that it just means so much, and we love sharing this country and contributing to it. And I think you can build more walls, you can protect more schools, you can arm more people, but what's much harder, and what conversations like tonight are so important, is about, well, how do we actually talk to each other, how do we understand each other, and how do we share this amazing country?
Kate, how do we do that?
Well, I couldn't agree more. We do that by taking inspiration from many Palestinians and Israelis that I work with in Israel and Palestine, who are building organisations together to ensure that they can live in a democratic and equal and just society. If they can do it there, then I truly believe we can do it here.
Thank you all very much for that. I want to get back to the couch, but before then, Dror Liraz is also with us tonight, a university student and a part of the Sydney University branch of the Australasian Council of Jewish Students. Dror, I wonder if you could share with us a bit of your experience as a Jewish university student. What has life on campus been like?
Well, it's been incredibly hard. Beyond that everyday endurance sport of getting through the microaggressions, the different acts of anti-Semitism, the losing of friendships, I'm having to struggle with reassuring fearful Jewish students without knowing to myself that I cannot guarantee their safety. And since the 7th of October, the Monday after we returned to uni, and since that Monday, we have endured both direct and indirect threats to our safety, whether that is in the form of death threats or a range of other anti-Semitic attacks. And I think that culminated in the Bondi massacre. And I think we have to look at the festering anti-Semitism at universities as in part contributing to that Bondi massacre and enabling it. And I think one of the only things that surprised me about the massacre was that it didn't occur at a university. And you have to understand, we are the only group of students in Australia that others have tried to either shame or scare into hiding who they are or hating who they are. You don't see Muslim students being shamed into taking off their hijabs, and you don't see Christian students being scared into taking off their crosses. And yet this is something we endure every single day.
Look, Dror, thank you. I just need to note, though, that the causes and contributing factors to Bondi are a matter for the criminal investigation, the court proceedings, and a Royal Commission as well. But appreciate your input there. And I want to come back to the couch here. We've obviously been talking about the impact that events in the Middle East have had when it comes to anti-Semitism here. And I guess the question a lot of Australians might be wondering, Jessica, is what does Israel mean to you? Why is it important to a Jewish Australian? If you could just explain that.
Israel is my home away from home. It has always been, and it will always be. It is the source of culture and life and songs, and it's a safe haven. It's a place where we can go. It's a place where we can feel welcomed. It's a safe place. And that means a lot to many Jewish people and many Jewish communities who have faced persecution for centuries.
Does that mean that you take criticism of Israel to be a criticism of the Jewish faith, Ronnie?
Absolutely not. I think that, as Kate described so beautifully, there are multiple truths, as that beautiful panel discussed. One can love Israel, but not love the government of Israel that is currently ruling. And I think we have to be able to say that. And we have to understand that that does not mean that we do not believe that the state of Israel should exist, but we believe that the government should change. And it is crucial that Australians understand that not every Jew is either an Israeli or a Zionist, and those three words, when I said words matter, those three words have been completely conflated. People are unable to differentiate between the people, the way Michael described how the Jews are a people, the religion is about peopledom, and being able to differentiate between people who believe in the state of Israel and what living and being an Israeli is. I mean, Avner's restaurant, just because he was an Israeli, was destroyed and he could not maintain his restaurant. There is a Russian deli. I don't see stones being thrown at the Russian deli because people don't like Putin. So something has gone completely wrong with the understanding, as that panel has explained so well.
Yeah, well, Jeremy, for you, when does that legitimate criticism of Israel, or the Netanyahu government particularly, cross the line into anti-Semitism? Is there a point at which that happens?
There is, and I think one of the changes that I'd like to see is an articulation between legitimate protest. We embrace that. We're a free society, we're a democratic society. And where is the line between legitimate protest against the policy of a government, whether it's Australian, whether it's Chinese, whether it's Israeli, and hateful slogans that call for violence? And there is a clear line, and the line is being crossed. So when we reflect on Bondi, I know that one person said today that they were surprised. I was not. When I saw the hateful slogans that started on the day after October the 7th, 2023, before Israel had even responded, and then graffiti, and then the online behaviour that we saw, and then cars being torched, and cafes and restaurants being trashed, and synagogues being firebombed, Bondi was not a surprise to me. So when we talk about the high fences and guarding that we need to do for Jewish schools that Jewish parents uniquely in Australia have to pay for to protect their Jewish children who are Australian citizens from other Australian citizens, which is a unique tax on their Jewish identity, at some point, not just the Jewish community, but the wider community needs to say, and they are saying now, this is not us, we're better than that.
Well, Australia's Race Discrimination Commissioner Giri Sivaraman is also with us tonight. Giri, we've been focused tonight on anti-Semitism, but as you and I have discussed before, there's a rise in Islamophobia, a rise in racism generally. Just put this in context for us. What's going on here?
What's going on is that the target keeps changing, but the problem remains. In our consultations for the National Anti-Racism Framework, we found that racism is deeply embedded across our society. It's pervasive, it affects many different cohorts. If you just want to go back 6 years, a huge surge in racism towards people of Asian origin or Chinese origin during COVID. Then the Voice referendum just mainstreamed horrific racism towards First Peoples. That's remained at very high levels, and we've just seen a Senate inquiry announced into racism towards First Peoples recently. Then, of course, after October 7, terrifying surge in anti-Semitism, and we've heard some harrowing stories today. And we've also seen an increase in anti-Palestinian racism, Islamophobia, anti-Arab racism, and now, just in the last few months, a surge in racism towards people of Indian origin, violence towards people of Indian origins, people of Indian origin being singled out in anti-immigration rallies. So you can see that the target keeps changing, but we've obviously got a fundamental problem. A problem with our structures that need to be fixed. We need a whole of government, whole of society solution. And the other thing to note is we just released a historic report into racism in the university sector, where we had over 76,000 people participate in a survey, and many communities talked about experiencing racism: African, Asian, Palestinian, Jewish, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, Pacifica, all of them at rates over 70%.
So I know you've made a list of recommendations to the government and you're still waiting on a formal response for them more than a year on, but we are seeing the government do a range of things. Is there one or two things you would say still need to be done to tackle all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the problem is that to date what we've seen is a piecemeal approach, or an approach that can pit communities against each other. And you've heard from other speakers how we need to bring communities together. So what you want is solutions that lift everyone, like we call for in the National Anti-Racism Framework, which as of today hasn't been endorsed or funded or implemented in any way by any level of government. And some of the key areas in that framework align very much with the reports of the Envoy Against Anti-Semitism and the Envoy Against Islamophobia. That is, firstly, a focus on data. We don't actually have very good data on how racism affects our society. We rely on community organisations who are very stretched to collect that data. We need better focuses in education. We need better focuses in workplaces. When you think about that person who ends up committing a horrific act like they did at Bondi, on that journey of hate, you got to know, where could we have touched that person and shifted them off that path? They probably went to school, they probably had a job. There's two opportunities where we could have actually lifted racial literacy and tried to stop something so horrific from happening.
Giri, thank you. Look, we are running out of time, but I want to get some thoughts. Michael, where to from here? What needs to happen?
Well, I think the first thing is that we have to recognise that, yes, there's racism across the board in Australia. I don't know how widespread it is, but I've lived with it. I know about it. I knew about it as a journalist. But what we're talking about right now is that for 2.5 years, the Jewish community in Australia has suffered racist attacks. It's not just verbal. It's not just on social media, which, if you follow it at all, is a sewer of anti-Semitism. It's huge, and there will be a sewer after tonight. It'll be huge, but they've also suffered real attacks, and we have to come to terms with that's a fact. How do we deal with that? I just want to say about the slogans. I'm not in favour of banning slogans, but the fact is this government and governments and other institutions have basically failed to call those slogans out. They're doing it now, but they didn't do it on October the 9th, and they didn't do it subsequently until now. We need governments that say those slogans are unacceptable. No one has said that until now.
Jessica, to you finally on this, I mean, how do we ensure that Australia is a safe place for your kids as they grow up?
We try and teach tolerance and understanding. We run panels like this where hopefully someone in the audience can look at me as a person in the eye who is Jewish and Australian and Zionist and proud of all of those three things, and look at me in the eye and say that this deserved to happen to me. It didn't. It doesn't deserve to happen to anyone. And if you can look at a real person and still hold that hatred, then we're failing you.
Jeremy, will there come a time when the security gates, the armed guards are no longer needed at a school like yours?
I certainly hope so. And when I graduated as a history teacher or thought about becoming a principal, it certainly never occurred to me that I would be doing guarding contracts for armed guards or negotiating with builders about bomb-proof and bulletproof outward-looking buildings, or doing risk assessments where the children are safe going to a museum in the centre of Melbourne. So I think with this Royal Commission, we have some opportunity for real change where those kind of parts of my job become redundant.
Ronnie, let me ask you finally. You've got a walk for peace coming up in a couple of weeks. What's that about?
Well, a bunch of women, non-religious, non-political, non-affiliated, decided that we wanted to show the world that Australia can do things differently, that we could have a march, it's not a march, a walk for peace. So Women Walk for Peace is taking place on the 22nd of March, 10 a.m. to meet at Hyde Park, but there are certain parameters. We need to wear white, no flags, no slogans, no political clothing. All peace lovers are invited. The walk says Women Walk for Peace, because women do lead and are not part of the peace process. But that notion that I mentioned in the beginning, so first of all, everyone's invited. 10 a.m., 22nd of March. However, I mentioned doing good deeds, and I mentioned taking action, and I suppose this walk is part of taking action. But there is a beautiful quote by Amos Oz, an Israeli who passed away, an author that is very, very well known. And I would love to share that with everyone right now, because it is about taking action. And the quote goes like this: in the event of a huge conflagration like a bushfire, we as humans have three principal ways that we can behave. Number one, we can look at that fire and we can run away as fast as we can and leave those that cannot run to burn. Number two, we can write an angry letter to the newspaper demanding that the perpetrators get punished. Or number three, we can run and find a bucket. And if you cannot find a bucket, find a jug. And if you cannot find a jug, find a teaspoon. And I know that a teaspoon is tiny and that fire is huge, but there are millions of us, and every single one of us has a teaspoon. And if we all use our teaspoons, we can put out that fire. And I think that tonight we have been talking about the biggest fire that is burning. And every single one of us has a role to play, to make a difference, to take action, to educate, to share, to be kind, and to be good.
Well, I'm glad you brought that, a round of applause. I'm glad you brought the teaspoon around. Look, we are out of time, and if you would like more on all of this, our colleagues at Radio National have produced a special edition of Big Ideas. You can scan the QR code on screen to listen to that. I want to thank all of you for this conversation tonight. Jessica Rosen, Jeremy Stolinda, Ronnie Khan and Michael Gawenda, as well as our other panel, Alex Rivchin, Josh Burns and Kate Rosenberg. Now, if tonight's program has caused distress, you can call a 24/7 support service offered by Jewish House. The number is 1300 544 357. There is, of course, only so much we can do in 1 hour. Some of this isn't easy to discuss, but hopefully sharing stories and perspectives like this has helped build a greater understanding of the Jewish community in Australia and what it's been going through. Thanks for joining us for this inaugural ABC National Forum. Good night.